I'm 30F, and for as long as I can remember, family gatherings have been an experience. Not the warm, comforting kind, though. More like an annual roast where I'm the main act. My family, especially my cousin Sarah, 35F, seems to think my single status is the funniest thing about me. Sarah's the unofficial queen of family events. She's the one who organizes everything, hosts most of the dinners, and makes sure everyone knows how perfect her life is. Her husband, Greg, has a great job. Her words, not mine, and she loves reminding everyone how well they're doing. It's always Greg just got a promotion, or we're remodeling the kitchen. Again, she's the type who'll casually mention how much their new custom cabinets cost, just to see who's paying attention. Sarah's also the loudest when it comes to pointing out what's wrong with everyone else's lives, and for me, it's always the same thing. When are you finally going to find someone? At every gathering, she'll somehow slip in a comment about how I'm wasting my good years. The rest of the family joins in like they've rehearsed it. My parents aren't any better. They'll drop hints about how I should stop being so picky, or how they'd love to see me settle down. What none of them seem to care about is that I'm doing fine without a husband. Actually, I'm doing more than fine. I've been working in tech for years now, and my career's going great. I'm saving for my dream home, I have no debt, and I just hit a big milestone at work with a promotion that I'm really proud of. But none of that matters to them. To my family, being single at 30 is practically a crime. The truth is, I've tried dating, I've had relationships that didn't work out, and I'm not rushing into anything just to say I'm not single anymore. I'd rather wait for the right person than settle for the wrong one. But explaining that to them is like shouting into the wind. They don't want to hear it. What they care about is appearances, and in their eyes, marriage is the ultimate status symbol. The worst moment came at my niece's birthday party a few months ago. It was one of those big, over-the-top celebrations Sarah loves to throw. Everything was pink and gold and sparkly, and it was clear Sarah had spent more time planning it than most people spend on their weddings. Somewhere between cutting the cake and handing out party favors, Sarah decided it was time to entertain the room. She got everyone's attention and, with her usual smug smile, said something like, "Well, at least one of us isn't wasting their good years alone." The room erupted into laughter. I just stood there, frozen. It felt like every single pair of eyes was on me, waiting to see if I'd laugh along. I didn't. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I wasn't going to be the family punching bag anymore. I didn't say anything that day, I just left early. But as I drove home, I made a promise to myself. The next time I walked into a family gathering, things would be different. For a while, I just stopped showing up. No more Sunday dinners, no more holiday parties. I told my parents I was busy, which wasn't even a lie. I threw myself into work, started a new fitness routine, and even picked up a few hobbies I'd always wanted to try. It felt good to focus on myself for a change. And then, out of nowhere, I met Liam, 33M. I wasn't even looking for someone at the time. I downloaded a dating app mostly out of boredom, and there he was. His profile wasn't flashy, no shirtless gym selfies or photos of him posing with expensive cars. He just seemed normal. We started talking, and it was like we'd known each other forever. Liam's an entrepreneur. He runs his own company, but you'd never know it from how humble he is. He doesn't brag or make a big deal about his success, which is such a refreshing change from what I'm used to. We've been taking things slow, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I've found someone who gets me. One night, we were talking about work, and he mentioned he was in the process of acquiring a mid-sized company in an industry I didn't know much about. I didn't think much of it at the time, but something about the way he described it rang a bell. A few years ago, at some family dinner, Sarah had gone on and on about Greg's job. She'd mentioned he worked for a big-shot family-owned company that sounded a lot like the one Liam was talking about. I didn't bring it up to Liam right away, mostly because I wasn't sure. But the more I thought about it, the more it all started to click. While my family kept pestering me about being single, they had no idea I was seeing someone who might have a direct connection to Sarah and Greg's world. And honestly, the thought of that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. For now, though, Liam and I are keeping things low-key. We've been dating for a little over a year, and a few weeks ago, he proposed. I said yes, but we've decided not to tell anyone yet. Not until the time feels right. After everything I've been through with my family, I've learned one thing. The best surprises are the ones they never see coming. Update 1. Update. 2 years after stepping away from family gatherings, I found myself driving to Sarah's house again. This time, things were different. I wasn't coming alone. I was bringing Liam, my husband of 3 months. The wedding had been small, just close friends and no family. It wasn't out of spite, it was simply easier that way. Now, though, it was time to face everyone. The house looked the same as always, perfectly manicured lawn, expensive decor visible through the windows, and a driveway packed with cars. Sarah loved hosting, and her events always felt more like networking opportunities than family get-togethers. As Liam and I walked to the door, I could hear the familiar sounds of laughter and chatter. The second we stepped inside, everything paused. For a moment, it felt like I was in a spotlight. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to us. Someone muttered, "Is that?" but didn't finish. My parents were the first to recover. They came over, smiles wide but clearly forced, and hugged me as if we hadn't gone 2 years without speaking much. My mom's eyes darted to Liam, scanning him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. The rest of the family quickly followed. Sarah swept into the room, her signature perfume trailing behind her. She looked me up and down with that fake, sugary smile she used when she was trying to hide irritation. Greg stood a few steps behind her, quieter than usual. It wasn't long before Sarah zeroed in on Liam. Her voice cut through the room, louder than it needed to be, as she asked, "So, what does he do?" She had that tone she always used when she was expecting a disappointing answer. Liam, ever calm and collected, just said, "I'm in acquisitions." He didn't elaborate, didn't brag, just left it at that. That wasn't enough for Sarah. She tilted her head and pressed further, asking which companies he worked with. Liam glanced at me briefly, a small smile on his face, then turned back to her. He casually mentioned the name of the company he recently acquired. The room went quiet again. It was like the air had been sucked out. I watched Sarah's expression shift. At first, she didn't react, but then realization hit. The company Liam had just named? It was the one Greg worked for. Not just worked for, Greg had spent years bragging about how integral he was to its operations. Sarah's face turned a shade of red I didn't know was possible. Greg, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The silence didn't last long. My uncle, always one to chase a good story, started peppering Liam with questions about his career. Soon, the rest of the family joined in. Everyone wanted to know more about the mysterious man I'd married. It was like the years they'd spent mocking me had been erased, and suddenly I was the center of attention for all the right reasons. Sarah, of course, couldn't let it go. She pulled me aside when most of the family was distracted, her tone sharp and accusatory. She wanted to know why I hadn't told anyone I was seeing someone, let alone married. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I'd learned to keep things to myself. She didn't like that answer. She started rambling about how Greg was still a key player at the company, trying to downplay the situation. That's when Liam joined us. He must have noticed the tension because he walked over perfectly at ease and casually mentioned that he'd recently reviewed department performance reports. He added, almost as an afterthought, that Greg's team had been underperforming for a while. The way Sarah's jaw tightened told me she understood exactly what he was implying. From that moment, the dynamic shifted. The family, who had spent years treating me like an afterthought, suddenly couldn't stop complimenting me and Liam. My parents, in particular, went out of their way to apologize for all the times they'd made comments about me being single. My dad even said something about how he'd always known I'd find someone great, which was a blatant lie, but I let it slide. Greg spent the rest of the evening avoiding Liam and me. At one point, I saw him standing by the kitchen, nursing a drink and staring into space, while the rest of the family buzzed around Liam, asking about his plans for the company. Sarah, meanwhile, floated through the room like a ghost, smiling when she needed to, but clearly struggling to keep up appearances. By the time Liam and I left, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. The night had gone exactly as I'd hoped, but it was clear this was just the beginning. My family's sudden shift in behavior didn't erase years of mockery, and I wasn't naive enough to think everything would change overnight. Still, as we walked to the car, Liam squeezed my hand and smiled, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd truly taken back control of my narrative. Update 2. A few weeks after the family gathering, I got a call from Sarah. I wasn't expecting it, considering how things had gone the last time we were in the same room. Her tone was sharp from the moment I answered. Apparently, Greg's work life had taken a turn for the worse. Liam's company had been conducting a full audit of all departments, and Greg's name had come up. According to Sarah, Greg was now under intense scrutiny, and she didn't like it one bit. She didn't stop there. Sarah accused me of orchestrating the entire situation to get back at her for the years of comments and jokes. She claimed Liam must have been targeting Greg's department because of me, as if I had been sitting at home plotting revenge all these years. I listened quietly until she finished, then told her the truth. Liam doesn't mix personal matters with work. If Greg's team was being reviewed, it was because of their performance, not because of anything I'd said or done. That didn't satisfy her. She hung up in a huff, but the damage was done. The news spread through the family like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone seemed to know that Greg's job wasn't as secure as Sarah had always made it out to be. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing bits and pieces from relatives. Sarah was venting to anyone who would listen about how unfair it all was, and the more she talked, the more people started to piece things together. Then came the real blow. Greg was given an official performance improvement plan. From what I heard, it was a structured, time-bound plan that outlined everything he needed to improve in his role. Sarah tried to spin it as a routine thing, claiming that everyone goes through reviews like this, but no one was buying it. By now, the family was well aware that things weren't as perfect in Sarah's world as she liked to pretend. The fallout was immediate. Sarah started showing up to family events looking more stressed than usual. Her polite smiles had turned into forced grimaces, and she barely spoke to anyone unless it was to make a sarcastic remark about how some people get ahead by marrying rich. Her passive-aggressive jabs were obvious, but I didn't react. Liam and I would sit quietly, letting her words hang in the air without giving her the satisfaction of a response. Greg, on the other hand, stopped coming altogether. Whether it was embarrassment or just an unwillingness to face the gossip, he avoided every gathering after the first one. It wasn't long before people started talking about Sarah and Greg's financial situation. There were whispers about how they were cutting back on luxuries, skipping their usual vacations, and even postponing home renovations. The same relatives who used to hang on Sarah's every word now rolled their eyes whenever she brought up Greg's important job. Meanwhile, my parents' attitude toward me and Liam had completely shifted. They went from constantly criticizing me to openly praising Liam at every opportunity. My mom, who used to say things like, "When will you settle down?" now beamed with pride when she talked about my life. Sarah noticed, of course, and it only made her more hostile. She'd throw out comments about how I must have lucked out and found someone who could afford to take care of me, as if all my success had nothing to do with my hard work. At one point, Liam offered to move Greg to a different position within the company. He said it might ease some of the tension and give Greg a fresh start, but I told him no, not because I wanted Greg to suffer, but because it wasn't our place to interfere. If Greg's issues at work were performance-related, then he needed to handle them on his own. The situation reached a new low when another employee in Greg's department was promoted, a promotion Greg had apparently been aiming for. The news spread quickly, and by the time Sarah heard about it, it was the main topic of conversation at the next family gathering. She tried to brush it off, claiming Greg had turned down the opportunity, but no one believed her. The tension between Sarah and the rest of the family was palpable, and it was clear she was losing her grip on the narrative she'd controlled for so long. For the first time in years, I felt like I could stand my ground at family events. Sarah's usual dominance over the room had faded, and I no longer felt the need to stay quiet or avoid confrontation. When she made snide remarks, I'd respond with facts, not emotion. And when she tried to rally other family members against me, it backfired. Most of them had grown tired of her constant need for attention and sympathy. By the end of it all, Sarah and Greg's standing in the family had taken a major hit. They were no longer the golden couple everyone admired. And while I didn't enjoy watching their struggles, I couldn't ignore the irony of the situation. For years, Sarah had made me feel small because of her perfect life, and now the truth was out. What surprised me most, though, was how little I cared about their opinions anymore. The family's newfound respect for me and Liam was nice, but it wasn't what defined my happiness. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need their approval. I had built a life I was proud of, and that was enough. Update 3. The fallout reached its peak when Greg lost his job. Liam hadn't shared all the details with me, but I knew it wasn't a sudden decision. Over months, his company had reviewed performance metrics, and Greg's department had been underperforming consistently. In the end, it wasn't a targeted move. Greg simply couldn't keep up with the demands of his role. When the decision was made, Liam handled it professionally, as always, but I knew this news was going to hit Sarah like a truck. It didn't take long for Sarah to call, fuming. According to her, Greg's termination was a personal attack. She ranted about how I'd ruined their lives and accused Liam of using his position to settle some imaginary score. It was the same blame game as before, except this time her anger was fueled by desperation. I didn't engage. I let her rant, and when she finally hung up, I knew this was far from over. Word spread quickly through the family. Sarah didn't shy away from telling anyone who would listen about their unjust treatment. But instead of rallying sympathy, her story backfired. Most of the family sided with Liam and me, pointing out that Greg's termination was likely a result of his own performance, not some vendetta. Even family members who had previously stayed neutral started defending us, calling out Sarah's behavior as toxic and self-centered. The financial strain became obvious soon after. Sarah and Greg, who had always lived in a way that screamed keeping up appearances, were suddenly cutting back. They sold their house, yes, the same one Sarah had endlessly bragged about, and moved into a smaller, more modest place on the other side of town. Their expensive vacations, designer clothes, and constant remodeling projects came to a halt. The cracks started to show in Sarah's social circle as well. Her friends, who had always been part of her carefully curated image, began to distance themselves when they learned about Greg's termination. It wasn't just the job loss, it was the fact that Sarah had spent years bragging about their supposed perfection. Now that the truth was out, her friends didn't want to be part of the fallout. At one point, Sarah tried to extend an olive branch. She showed up at a family gathering unannounced, pulling me aside with a strained smile. She offered what could only be described as a half-hearted apology, mumbling something about misunderstandings and wanting to move forward. It felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. I listened, nodded politely, and walked away. There was no point in pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. While all of this was happening, Liam's company was thriving. The acquisition that had caused so much tension turned out to be one of his most successful moves yet. Profits were up, and his leadership was being recognized within the industry. One of his projects even caught the attention of a local business magazine, which ran a feature on him. The article mentioned our story in passing, framing it as a tale of hard work and perseverance. Seeing it in print felt surreal, but it also served as a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in Sarah's life. The family dynamic shifted significantly during this time. My parents, who had once been so quick to criticize me, started looking to me and Liam for advice. My mom would call to ask about everything from career tips to home improvements, while my dad openly expressed how proud he was of how far I'd come. It was a complete 180 from the way they used to treat me, and while it was nice to feel their support, I made sure to set firm boundaries. I wasn't going to let their approval define my happiness. Sarah, on the other hand, continued to spiral. Her bitterness was impossible to miss. At family events, she'd make passive-aggressive comments that no one entertained. Conversations would move on without her, leaving her stewing in the corner. The family had grown tired of her antics, and her once dominant presence had all but disappeared. Even Greg, who had been quieter in the past, started avoiding gatherings altogether. He'd taken a lower-paying job in a completely different industry, one that didn't align with the image Sarah had built around their lives. The more isolated Sarah became, the more peaceful my life felt. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had been spent trying to navigate her behavior until it was no longer a factor. Liam and I focused on our own lives, celebrating milestones quietly and keeping our circle small. We started hosting our own gatherings, inviting only the family members and friends who brought positivity into our lives. By the time Liam's company was featured in another article, this time a larger publication, it felt like a full circle moment. The same family who once questioned my choices was now proud to be associated with us. My parents even kept a framed copy of the article in their living room, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. As for Sarah, her appearances at family events became less frequent until they stopped altogether. The few times I saw her, she barely acknowledged me. Whatever power she'd once held over the family was gone, and with it, her ability to affect me. I had built a life I was proud of, a life that didn't revolve around seeking anyone's approval. In the end, I realized that Sarah's downfall wasn't something I needed to dwell on. It was her own choices that had led her there, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. I had my own life to live, and for the first time in years, it felt entirely mine. Update 4. It had been a couple of years since I'd last spoken to Sarah. After everything that happened, she had all but disappeared from family events. Most of the time, I didn't even think about her anymore. My focus was on Liam, our growing successes, and the life we were building. But one afternoon, out of nowhere, I got a message from her. The tone was unexpectedly polite, almost cautious. Sarah said she wanted to talk. She asked if I could meet her for coffee, and curiosity got the better of me. I agreed, wondering what could possibly be so important after all this time. When I arrived at the cafe, Sarah looked different. She seemed tired, her usual perfectly styled appearance now much more subdued. It didn't take long for her to get to the point. Greg, it turned out, was struggling to keep steady work. The small business he had tried to start after leaving Liam's company had failed, and they were in a tough spot financially. She wanted Liam to give Greg another chance, maybe a new position at the company or even just a recommendation to help him find something else. I listened without interrupting. Once she finished, I told her no. I explained that Liam and I had worked hard to set boundaries in our personal and professional lives, and this request crossed them. Sarah tried to plead her case, but I stayed firm. After years of her disrespect and mockery, I wasn't going to undo the progress we'd made by stepping back into her chaos. When Sarah realized I wasn't going to budge, her frustration boiled over. She muttered something about how families should help each other, but I calmly reminded her that she hadn't extended that same grace to me when I needed it. I left the cafe, certain this wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, the next family gathering was tense. Sarah, who had been avoiding these events for years, decided to show up. She didn't waste time pulling other relatives aside, telling them her version of the story. She painted herself and Greg as victims, claiming I was holding a grudge and refusing to help. A few family members seemed sympathetic to her, but most didn't take the bait. The evening took a turn when Sarah decided to confront me in front of everyone. She loudly questioned why I couldn't find it in my heart to help her family, especially after everything they'd been through. Her voice was shaky, and her words carried a mix of anger and desperation. It was clear she was trying to guilt me into giving her what she wanted. I didn't raise my voice or lose my composure. Instead, I stood up and addressed the room. I reminded everyone how Sarah had treated me for years, how she had mocked me, belittled my achievements, and turned every family gathering into an opportunity to humiliate me. I explained that my decision wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my peace and the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. I owed her nothing, and I wasn't going to compromise my principles to clean up a mess she and Greg had created. The room was silent when I finished. No one came to Sarah's defense. Even the few relatives who had initially seemed sympathetic avoided making eye contact with her. Liam, who had stayed by my side the entire time, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, silently supporting everything I'd said. Sarah didn't say another word. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The tension lingered for a moment, but then the conversation shifted and the rest of the evening continued as if nothing had happened. It was clear that Sarah's influence over the family was gone, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. In the months that followed, Liam and I started new traditions. We began hosting our own family events, inviting only those who brought positivity into our lives. My parents became regular guests, and our relationship grew stronger than it had ever been. Other family members, relieved to no longer walk on eggshells around Sarah, started reaching out more as well. As for Sarah and Greg, they faded further into the background. Sarah stopped attending family events altogether, and the few times I heard about her, it was through vague updates from relatives. Greg eventually found another job, though it was a far cry from the high-status position he once held. He seemed to have accepted his new reality, focusing on rebuilding his life in a quieter, more humble way. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe how far things have come. The girl who used to dread family gatherings is gone. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who truly care about me. Liam's success has continued to grow, but we've kept our feet on the ground, knowing how quickly things can change. The most surprising part, I don't feel the need to prove myself anymore. For years, I let Sarah's opinions shape how I saw myself. Now I see her bitterness for what it was, a reflection of her own insecurities. I've moved on, and I'm at peace with the decisions I've made. In the end, life isn't about winning or losing. It's about building something that makes you happy. And for the first time, I can honestly say I've done that. Update 5. I wasn't expecting Sarah to come back into my life, but she has a way of showing up in the most inconvenient ways. This time, it wasn't a direct approach. A mutual acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, reached out to let me know that Sarah was spreading rumors. Apparently, she was telling anyone who would listen that Liam had stolen Greg's company. According to her, it had been some shady, underhanded deal orchestrated by me, a manipulative gold digger who had plotted the whole thing to destroy their lives. Hearing this didn't surprise me, but it was frustrating. After all the chaos she'd caused, she was still trying to drag us down. I knew I had two choices: react emotionally and confront her, or handle it strategically. I chose the latter. When I told Liam about it, he didn't even flinch. He pulled up the acquisition documents on his laptop. Everything was clear as day. The purchase had been handled professionally, with full transparency, and Greg's performance had nothing to do with the decision. It was just business, and Liam had the receipts to prove it. Knowing we had this proof gave me peace of mind, but I wasn't done yet. A few days later, something else fell into my lap. While looking over some of Liam's company paperwork, I noticed Sarah's name. She had applied for a business loan and had listed Liam's company as a reference. From what I could tell, she was trying to start a side business, likely to recover from the financial losses she and Greg had faced. The loan wasn't approved yet, but it was clear that this was a make or break situation for her. When I mentioned this to Liam, he raised an eyebrow but didn't say much. Later that evening, he handed me the file and told me the decision was mine. After years of Sarah's insults, mockery, and attempts to ruin my reputation, he felt I deserved the final say. I thought about it for a while. It would have been easy to deny the loan and let her face the consequences, but I didn't want to stoop to her level. Instead, I decided to let her know, indirectly, that Liam had significant influence over her application. If she wanted to keep burning bridges, she would have to think twice. Sure enough, not long after, Sarah called me. Her voice was different this time, calm, almost desperate. She didn't mention the loan outright, but I could tell she knew. She offered what she called a heartfelt apology, saying she wanted to make amends and move forward. I listened carefully, waiting for the catch. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't about genuine remorse, it was about securing her future. I decided to test her sincerity. I told her that if she really wanted to apologize, she needed to do it in front of the entire family, publicly. For years, her insults and mockery had been a spectacle, and I wasn't going to accept anything less than a public acknowledgement of what she'd done. At the next family gathering, Sarah showed up looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. She waited until everyone was seated and then stood up, her hands trembling slightly. She admitted to years of mocking and mistreating me, apologizing for the things she had said and done. Her voice cracked a few times, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone. It was the apology I'd asked for, but as I watched her, I couldn't help but feel that it wasn't entirely genuine. It felt more like a performance than a heartfelt attempt to make things right. After the gathering, I pulled her aside and told her the truth. While I appreciated the effort, it didn't change how I felt. I told her our relationship would remain distant. I wasn't going to erase years of hurt for one moment of forced vulnerability. She nodded, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She had been hoping for more. In the end, Liam approved the loan. He didn't block it, and he didn't interfere, ensuring that if Sarah and Greg failed, it wouldn't be because of us. It was the right decision, and it gave us peace of mind. We didn't want to give them any ammunition to twist the narrative further. As it turned out, the loan didn't make much of a difference. Sarah and Greg's business venture failed within the first year. Poor planning, unrealistic expectations, and financial mismanagement were the culprits. The failure only solidified their struggles, while Liam and I continued to grow stronger and more successful. The family's respect for us grew as well. People turned to us for advice, not just on business but on life. My parents, who once questioned my choices, now openly praised me and Liam for everything we'd accomplished. The shift in dynamics was undeniable, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace. Sarah, on the other hand, faded further into the background. She and Greg stopped attending family events altogether, and the few times I heard about them, it was through secondhand updates. Whatever bitterness she still held, it no longer affected me. In the end, I realized something important. I didn't need Sarah's approval or anyone else's. I had built a life on my terms, with a partner who truly cared for me and a future I was proud of, and that was more than enough.